I never thought my own son's wedding would become the stage for my greatest humiliation and most unexpected triumph. But what they didn't know was that sometimes the quiet ones hold all the cards. Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a tale that will leave you speechless. Comment below where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories like this. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and at 73 I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I raised my son Michael as a single mother after his father abandoned us when Michael was just 5. For 30 years I worked double shifts as a night nurse at Boston General Hospital, sacrificing sleep, social life, and my own dreams to give Michael everything he needed. I put him through private school, paid for his college at Harvard Business School, and even helped him with his first apartment in Manhattan. Every penny of my modest salary went toward his future. I wore the same 3 dresses to work for years, drove a beat-up Honda until the wheels nearly fell off, and lived on ramen noodles so he could have steak dinners with his friends. When Michael graduated and landed a job at a prestigious investment firm, I felt like I'd conquered the world. My sacrifice had paid off. He was successful, handsome, and charming, everything I'd dreamed he'd become. But success changed him in ways I wasn't prepared for. He started visiting less, calling less, and when he did visit, he seemed almost embarrassed by our small apartment in South Boston. I told myself it was natural, he was building his own life. What mother wouldn't understand that? But deep down something felt wrong. The boy who once brought me flowers from the neighbor's garden now barely looked me in the eye. Then he met Victoria. Victoria Blackwell was everything I wasn't: young, polished, and from old money. At 28 she had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about rent or choosing between groceries and medicine. Her family owned a chain of luxury hotels across New England, and she worked as a marketing director at her father's company. The first time Michael brought her home, I could see her taking inventory of our tiny 2-bedroom apartment. Her eyes lingered on my second-hand furniture, my worn carpet, and the small kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals on a budget that wouldn't cover one of her dinners out. "So this is where Michael grew up," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How quaint. I tried to make conversation over dinner, asking about her work and family. Victoria answered with the kind of polite disinterest reserved for service workers. When I mentioned my nursing career, she perked up slightly. "Oh, how nice that you had a little job to keep busy," she said, as if 30 years of saving lives was a hobby I'd picked up to pass time. Michael said nothing. The boy I'd raised to stand up for what was right just sat there, cutting his pot roast and avoiding my eyes. That night, after they left, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and wondered when I'd become so invisible, even to my own son. But I pushed down the hurt. Victoria made Michael happy, and wasn't that what mattered? I convinced myself that love would soften her edges, that she'd learn to appreciate the life we'd built together through sweat and sacrifice. I was so wrong. 6 months later, Michael called to tell me they were engaged. I should have been overjoyed, but something in his voice made my stomach clench. He sounded nervous, almost guilty. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed. "When's the wedding?" "Next spring. Victoria's planning everything. It's going to be big. Really big." "Of course it is. Her family will want to celebrate properly." There was a pause. "Mom, about the wedding. Victoria thinks, we think it might be better if you didn't, if your involvement was minimal." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "She has a wedding planner, caterers, everything handled. Her mother is really particular about these things. Traditional, you know. Mother of the groom usually just shows up and smiles." I gripped the phone tighter. "I see. You understand, right? It's her day. Her dream wedding. Her day. Not their day. Not my son's day. Her day." "Of course," I whispered. "Whatever makes you happy." But after I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time in years. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who made me breakfast in bed every Mother's Day with burnt toast and too sweet coffee, had just told me I wasn't welcome in one of the most important moments of his life. Still, I told myself at least I'd be there. At least I'd get to watch my son marry the woman he loved, even if I had to do it from the sidelines. The months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in exclusion. Victoria sent me formal invitations like I was a distant acquaintance, not the mother of the groom. When I offered to help with anything, flowers, music, even addressing envelopes, I was politely but firmly declined. "Everything's handled, Eleanor," Victoria would say with that practiced smile. "But thank you for offering." Michael stopped coming by altogether. When I called, he was always busy with wedding planning work, or Victoria's family events that I wasn't invited to. I watched my son slip away from me one conversation at a time, each one shorter and more distant than the last. The final blow came when I asked about what I should wear. "Something simple," Victoria said when I called her directly. "Navy blue or gray. Nothing too attention-grabbing. We don't want you competing with the bridal party." Competing? I was 73 years old, wore orthopedic shoes and hadn't bought a new dress in 5 years. But I swallowed my pride and went shopping for something appropriate, something that would help me blend into the background of my own son's wedding. I found a simple navy dress at Macy's, nothing fancy, but it fit well and made me feel dignified. When I showed Michael over FaceTime, he barely looked up from his phone. "Looks fine, Mom. Gotta run, we're meeting Victoria's cousins for dinner." The night before the wedding, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd become such an afterthought in the life I'd spent decades building. Tomorrow, I'd watch my son marry a woman who saw me as an embarrassment, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Or so I thought. The wedding was held at the Blackwell family estate in Martha's Vineyard, 300 acres of perfectly manicured lawns, rose gardens, and old money elegance. I arrived by ferry, clutching my small purse and feeling completely out of place among the arriving guests in their designer outfits and expensive cars. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give Victoria that. She'd spared no expense and every detail was flawless. White roses everywhere, a string quartet, and enough champagne to float a yacht. Michael looked handsome in his custom tuxedo, though I noticed he seemed nervous, constantly adjusting his tie and scanning the crowd. I sat in the third row as directed. Not the front row where mothers of the groom traditionally sit, but far enough back that I wouldn't accidentally appear in too many photos. Victoria's mother, Margaret Blackwell, held court in the front row wearing a tiara that probably cost more than my yearly pension. During the ceremony, I watched my son promise to love and cherish Victoria, and I tried to feel happy. This was his choice, his life. All I could do was support him, even if it meant accepting that I'd never be more than a tolerated presence in his new world. The reception began with cocktails on the terrace overlooking the harbor. I nursed a glass of wine and tried to make small talk with the other guests, most of whom were Victoria's family friends or colleagues. They were polite but distant, the way people are when they're trying to figure out where you fit in their social hierarchy. That's when I spotted him across the terrace and my blood ran cold. James Morrison stood near the bar, looking exactly as I remembered, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and radiating the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of wielding power. He was older now, obviously, but those steel-gray eyes were unmistakable. 25 years ago, James Morrison had been the hospital administrator who'd made my life hell. He'd taken over Boston General when I was 48, implementing efficiency measures that translated to longer hours, smaller staff, and impossible patient loads. When nurses started burning out and patients began suffering, I'd been foolish enough to file complaints. Morrison had made me pay for that defiance. Suddenly, I was always scheduled for the worst shifts, given the most difficult patients, and passed over for promotions I'd earned. When I finally got the courage to report his retaliation, he'd smiled that cold smile and suggested maybe I wasn't cut out for the demands of modern healthcare. I'd been forced into early retirement at 55, losing years of pension benefits and career advancement. The official reason was restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. Cross James Morrison and he'd make sure you regretted it. Now here he was at my son's wedding, chatting with Victoria like they were old friends. My hands shook as I set down my wine glass. What were the odds? Then I noticed Victoria approaching him with a bright smile, her arm linked through the elbow of a distinguished woman I didn't recognize. "James, I'd like you to meet my new mother-in-law," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the terrace. Eleanor Hayes, this is James Morrison, my boss and the CEO of Blackwell Hospitality Group. My world tilted sideways. Victoria worked for Morrison. The man who'd destroyed my career was now in a position to influence my son's marriage. And from the way Victoria was looking at me, she was about to make that influence very personal. Eleanor Hayes, James Morrison said, extending his hand with that same political smile I remembered. What a pleasure to meet Michael's mother. I shook his hand, my mind racing. Did he remember me? 25 years was a long time and I'd aged considerably. My hair was white now instead of brown and I'd gained weight from medications and stress. Maybe I was just another forgotten casualty from his climb up the corporate ladder. The pleasure's mine, I managed. Victoria practically glowed as she positioned herself between us. Eleanor used to be a nurse, James. She's retired now, of course. Unemployed. The word hit like a slap. Not retired, unemployed. As if my 30 years of service meant nothing. As if I was some lazy woman who'd never worked a day in her life. How interesting, Morrison said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied my face. Something flickered there. Recognition? Or was I imagining it? Yes, well, some people are content with simpler lives, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Not everyone needs to be ambitious or successful. Eleanor's been living quite comfortably on her little pension, haven't you, dear? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The other guests were starting to notice our conversation, probably drawn by Victoria's unnecessarily loud voice. She was performing, making sure everyone could hear her subtle assassination of my character. Actually, I said carefully, I was head nurse in cardiac intensive care for. Oh, that's so sweet that you had a little job to keep busy, Victoria interrupted with a tinkling laugh. But let's not bore James with ancient history. He's much too important to worry about small-time hospital work. Morrison's expression was unreadable, but I caught him studying me more intently. The woman with Victoria, who I now realized must be someone important from the company, looked uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. Victoria, the woman said softly, perhaps we should. No, it's fine, Victoria waved her off. Eleanor understands her place in Michael's new life. Don't you, Eleanor? The crowd around us was growing. Michael appeared at Victoria's side, looking mortified but saying nothing. Other guests pretended to be engaged in their own conversations while obviously listening to every word. James, you really must understand what we're dealing with here, Victoria continued, her voice getting louder and more theatrical. Eleanor raised Michael all by herself, which sounds admirable until you realize she spoiled him terribly. Never taught him about proper society, good breeding, or how to function in our world. Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I see. She lives in this tiny apartment in South Boston. You know the area, probably not somewhere you'd ever venture. When Michael brought me there for dinner, I could barely hide my shock. The furniture looked like it came from garage sales, and she served us dinner on chipped plates. Each word was a knife between my ribs. The chipped plates I'd bought when Michael was 10, saving up for months to get a matching set. The furniture I'd carefully selected from thrift stores and refinished by hand because it was all I could afford while paying for his education. Victoria, Michael said quietly, maybe we should. Oh, don't worry, honey. Your mother understands. She knows she had her chance to shape your life and now it's my turn. Eleanor's had her little moment of importance, playing the martyred single mother. But that chapter's over now. The woman standing with Morrison looked genuinely appalled. Several other guests were staring openly, no longer pretending to ignore the spectacle. I felt like I was drowning in shame, standing there while my son's new wife systematically destroyed every sacrifice I'd made for him. The truth is, James, Victoria said, turning back to Morrison with a conspiratorial smile, Eleanor is basically an unemployed loser who thinks she deserves credit for doing the bare minimum a parent should do. She acts like paying for Michael's education makes her some kind of saint, but honestly, what else did she have to spend money on? It's not like she had a social life or real responsibilities. The terrace fell silent. Even the string quartet seemed to pause between songs. Morrison looked at me for a long moment, then at Victoria, then back at me. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Miss Blackwell," he said, and Victoria beamed at being addressed directly. "You're fired." The silence on the terrace was deafening. Victoria's smile froze on her face, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry, what?" she laughed nervously. "James, you're joking, right? It's my wedding day." "I don't joke about employment decisions," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "As of this moment, your employment with Blackwell Hospitality Group is terminated." Victoria's face went white. "You can't be serious. This is a misunderstanding. You were just publicly humiliating a woman whose only crime was raising a son who clearly doesn't deserve her," Morrison said, his voice getting colder with each word. "In front of our biggest investors, no less." He gestured around the terrace, and for the first time Victoria seemed to notice that several of the guests were watching with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. The woman who'd been standing with Morrison, who I now realized must be someone very important in the company, was shaking her head in disappointment. "James, please," Victoria stammered. "I didn't mean. Eleanor and I just have different backgrounds." "I was trying to explain." "You were trying to humiliate someone you perceived as beneath you," Morrison interrupted. "At your own wedding, in front of people who could destroy your family's reputation with a single phone call. The kind of judgment that makes me question every decision I've ever trusted you with." Michael finally found his voice. "Mr. Morrison, surely there's been a misunderstanding." Victoria was just. Morrison held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Victoria's increasingly panicked face. 25 years ago, Morrison said, his voice carrying across the silent terrace, "I made a terrible mistake. I let my ego and my position of power convince me that I could treat good people badly because I thought they couldn't fight back. I ruined the career of one of the finest nurses I ever had the displeasure of supervising." My breath caught in my throat. He did remember. "Eleanor Hayes," Morrison continued, turning to face me directly, "was head of cardiac intensive care at Boston General Hospital. She saved more lives than most doctors I know. When I took over that hospital, I was young, arrogant, and convinced that efficiency mattered more than compassion. Eleanor filed complaints about patient safety, about understaffing, about conditions that were putting lives at risk," Morrison continued, his voice echoing across the now completely silent terrace. "Instead of listening to someone with 30 years of experience, I saw it as insubordination. I made her life hell until she was forced into early retirement." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "It was the biggest professional mistake of my life," Morrison said, his eyes still locked on mine. "Within 6 months of Eleanor's departure, we had 3 preventable deaths and a lawsuit that nearly bankrupted the hospital. The nursing staff she'd trained started quitting in droves. It took us years to rebuild what I'd destroyed in my arrogance." The distinguished woman beside him nodded grimly. "James has told me this story many times. It's why our company has such strict policies about workplace respect and retaliation." "Eleanor Hayes," Morrison said, turning back to Victoria, "is not an unemployed loser. She's a healthcare hero who lost her career because of my stupidity and pride. And watching you treat her like garbage while she stands there with dignity intact tells me everything I need to know about your character." Victoria's face was cycling through emotions: shock, anger, desperation, and finally, a kind of cold fury that made her beautiful features look ugly. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, some of her composure returning. "You can't fire me over a personal conversation. My family will." "Your family," Morrison interrupted, "just lost their biggest client. Blackwell Hospitality Group has been managing Morrison Industries' corporate events for 15 years. Consider that contract terminated as well." The woman beside him, who I now understood must be from Morrison Industries, nodded. "We'll be moving our business elsewhere, effective immediately." Victoria's face crumbled as the reality hit her. Morrison Industries wasn't just any client. They were probably responsible for a significant portion of her family's revenue. "You can't do this," Victoria whispered, but the fight was already going out of her voice. I can and I have, Morrison replied. Then he turned to me. Mrs. Hayes, I owe you an apology that's 25 years overdue. Would you do me the honor of having lunch with me next week? I'd like to discuss how I might finally make things right. The terrace erupted into whispered conversations as guests processed what they'd just witnessed. Victoria stood frozen, her wedding dress suddenly looking more like a costume she couldn't escape. Michael looked between his new wife and me, his face a map of confusion and dawning horror. Mom, he started, but I held up a hand. Not here, Michael. Not now. Victoria's mother, Margaret Blackwell, appeared at her daughter's side like a vulture sensing carrion. Her face was pale but controlled, the kind of damage control expression that comes from years of managing social catastrophes. James, surely we can discuss this privately, Margaret said, her voice smooth but strained. This is hardly the time or place. There's nothing to discuss, Morrison replied. The decision is final. I watched Victoria's world crumble in real time. The confident young woman who'd spent months making me feel small and worthless now looked like a child who'd been caught breaking something valuable. Eleanor, she said suddenly, grabbing my arm with desperate strength. Please. Tell him this was all a misunderstanding. You know I didn't mean anything by it. I looked down at her perfectly manicured hand on my arm, then back at her face. For a moment, I saw not the cruel woman who'd systematically excluded me from my son's life, but a scared girl who'd finally pushed too far and discovered there were consequences. I don't think I can help you, Victoria, I said quietly. You see, I'm just an unemployed loser who doesn't understand her place. Her hand dropped away like I'd burned her. Morrison was still watching us, and something in his expression had shifted from professional coldness to personal interest. Mrs. Hayes, I meant what I said about lunch. But there's something else I'd like to discuss with you right now, if you're willing. The crowd leaned in slightly, sensing that the drama wasn't over yet. 25 years ago, when I forced you out of Boston General, I cost you more than just a job. You lost pension benefits, advancement opportunities, and professional recognition that you'd earned through decades of service. My heart started beating faster. Where was this going? I've made inquiries over the years trying to find a way to make amends. Your reputation in the medical community is spotless. Everyone I've spoken to remembers Eleanor Hayes as the nurse they'd want caring for their own family. Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. 3 months ago, Morrison Industries acquired a chain of private medical facilities. We're converting them into luxury healthcare centers for executives and their families. We need someone to oversee the nursing staff and establish protocols. I stared at the card in his hand, afraid to take it. The position pays $250,000 a year, plus full benefits and a retirement package that would compensate for the pension benefits you lost, he continued. More importantly, it would put you back where you belong, leading healthcare professionals and saving lives. The terrace was so quiet I could hear the waves lapping against the dock below. Victoria made a small, strangled sound. James, she whispered. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my professional life, Morrison replied, still holding out the card. Mrs. Hayes, you'd be doing me the favor. We need someone with your experience and integrity to build something special. I looked at the card, then at Morrison, then at my son, who was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. $250,000? Michael said faintly. Plus benefits, Morrison confirmed. And a signing bonus to make up for lost time. I took the card with shaking hands. It was real, thick paper with elegant lettering. Director of Nursing Operations, Morrison Medical Centers. Victoria was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Please, James. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you want. Don't ruin my life over this. You ruined your own life, Morrison said without looking at her. Just like I almost ruined mine 25 years ago by letting ego override decency. He turned back to me. There's one more thing, Mrs. Hayes. The flagship facility is being built in Boston, just 10 minutes from your apartment. You wouldn't have to relocate unless you wanted to. Margaret Blackwell stepped forward, her composure finally cracking. James, we can work something out. The Blackwell Group has been loyal to Morrison Industries for 15 years. Don't throw that away over a family misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Morrison said coldly. It was a character reveal. And frankly, Margaret, the fact that you're standing here trying to minimize your daughter's cruelty instead of apologizing to Mrs. Hayes tells me everything I need to know about where Victoria learned her values. My son had been standing silent through most of this exchange, but now he stepped forward, his face flushed with what I hoped was shame. Mom, he said, his voice barely audible over the ocean breeze. I had no idea about your history with Mr. Morrison. About what happened at the hospital. You never asked, I replied simply. You just accepted that I retired early and never wondered why. Victoria said, she told me you just got tired of working. That you wanted to take it easy. I looked at his new wife who was still crying silently. Is that what she told you? Michael's hands were shaking. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have stood up for you. I should have stopped her from talking to you like that. Yes, I said. You should have. The words hung between us like a physical thing. Around us, the wedding guests were starting to drift away, sensing that the evening's entertainment was winding down. Some looked disappointed, others relieved to escape the awkwardness. I don't know how to fix this, Michael said, and for the first time in years he sounded like the little boy who used to come to me with skinned knees and broken toys. That's something you'll have to figure out, I replied. Both of you. Morrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Hayes, I should let you get back to celebrating your son's wedding. But I hope you'll consider my offer seriously. The position starts whenever you're ready. He handed me another card. That's my personal cell phone. Call me this week and we'll set up that lunch. As he walked away, Victoria grabbed my arm again, her grip desperate. Eleanor, please. I know I was terrible to you. I was just nervous about fitting in, about being good enough for Michael's family. I took it out on you and that was wrong. I looked down at her tear-streaked face. She was 28 years old, younger than some of the nurses I'd trained. Maybe there was still hope for her to learn and grow. Victoria, I said gently, I spent 30 years taking care of people. I know the difference between someone who's scared and someone who's cruel. What you did tonight wasn't about nerves. She flinched like I'd slapped her. But, I continued, you're family now. And family means we find a way to move forward, even when it's hard. The reception continued around us, but the energy had completely shifted. Most guests were leaving early, some stopping to quietly introduce themselves to me. Apparently, several of them had heard Morrison's speech and wanted to meet the healthcare hero he'd mentioned. Victoria disappeared into the house, presumably to repair her makeup and try to salvage what was left of her wedding day. Michael stood beside me looking lost. Mom, I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far, he said. When Victoria talked about you, I thought she was just adjusting. Learning to fit in with a different kind of family. What kind of family did you tell her we were, Michael? He looked away. I may have downplayed some things. I told her you were retired, that you'd worked at a hospital, but it wasn't a big deal. I wanted her to see me as successful on my own merit, not because of your sacrifices. So you erased me. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her family to accept me, and I thought if they knew how hard things had been for us, they might see me differently. I understood then. My son, the boy I'd raised to be confident and proud, had been so intimidated by Victoria's wealth and social status that he'd rewritten our history to fit their narrative. Michael, I said softly, I worked 3 jobs to send you to private school. I went without health insurance for 2 years to pay for your college applications. I ate rice and beans for dinner so you could have tutoring in calculus. He was crying now, not caring who saw. I know, Mom. I know all of that. Then why did you let her treat me like I was worthless? Because I was ashamed, he whispered. Not of you, of myself. I was ashamed that I'd let her change how I saw our life together. She made me feel like everything we'd been through was somehow lesser, and instead of defending you, I started seeing us through her eyes. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Victoria's parents have money, Mom, but they're not happy. They barely speak to each other except in public. Victoria grew up thinking that success meant having the right address and the right friends, and I got caught up in that. And now, Michael looked back toward the house where his new wife had disappeared. Now I realize I married someone who doesn't understand what real love looks like. 3 weeks later, I sat across from James Morrison in his corner office on the 40th floor of a Boston skyscraper. The contract for my new position lay between us, signed and official. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" he asked. "It's been 20 years since you worked in healthcare. A lot has changed." "So have I," I replied. "I'm stronger now. More confident. Less willing to let powerful men intimidate me." He laughed, a genuine sound that made him look younger. "I suppose I deserved that." "You did. But we all deserve second chances." The door to his office opened, and his assistant announced that Michael was here for our lunch appointment. Morrison stood to leave, giving us privacy. "I meant what I said at the wedding, Eleanor. If you need anything at all, you call me directly." After he left, Michael sat down across from me, looking nervous and tired. Victoria wasn't with him, and I didn't ask why. "How are things at home?" I asked instead. "Complicated," he admitted. "Victoria's been fired, her family lost a major client, and she's finally understanding that actions have consequences. We're in counseling." "That's good. She wants to apologize to you properly. Not the desperate apology at the wedding, but a real one. She's been reading about the nursing profession, trying to understand what she dismissed so casually." I nodded. "When she's ready, I'm willing to listen." Michael reached across the desk and took my hand. "Mom, I need you to know that watching you at that wedding, seeing how you handled everything with such dignity while Victoria and I fell apart, I realized something." "What's that?" "You're the strongest person I know. You always have been. And I'm sorry it took public humiliation for me to remember that." 3 months later, I started my new job. The Morrison Medical Centers were everything James had promised. State-of-the-art facilities with the resources to provide exceptional care. My staff called me Director Hayes, and I felt like myself again for the first time in decades. Victoria did eventually apologize, and it was genuine. She's working now at a non-profit that serves underprivileged communities, trying to understand the value of service over status. She and Michael are still married, still in counseling, but they're working on building something real. As for me, I wake up every morning excited to go to work. I'm mentoring young nurses, developing protocols, and yes, still saving lives. At 73, I'm having the career I was meant to have all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well and refusing to let anyone else's opinion define your worth. Comment below if you've ever been underestimated, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when others try to tear you down. Until next time, remember, you're never too old to rewrite your story.